Morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's still fairly early. I'm not sure. I hope you're all keeping well. It's a beautiful, sunny but cold autumnal dry day here in the northwest of Ireland. And I hope you're all keeping well and you had a nice weekend. Now we're back to Monday and the week begins in earnest. How many times have I told you that there's nothing more wretched, nothing more despicable, nothing more treacherous than a frightened, weak little man? Frightened, weak little men are the engine oil of tyranny and oppression. Without frightened, weak little men, tyrants have no power. They are inert. It's the fears and the terrors of frightened little men that remove the inertia from tyrants and oppressors and give them wings. Now, if you know people in your life that are frightened little men, I can assure you that it's only a matter of time before they put the knife in your back. Weasels are like this. They'll either do it in such a way that it requires no bravery on their part or perceived bravery. The frightened little man will attack only when it feels it has the solidarity with the wretched collective. So therefore, if the frightened little man is in a position where it has a collective around it, then it will attack, believing that the solidarity of the collective gives them the compensatory courage that they don't have as individuals in normal day life. This is what makes the wretched little man so absolutely dangerous, is because it can turn on a dime. But there are warning signs. The wretched little man is usually mediocre, usually a mammy's boy. He's mummy's special little boy, but he doesn't have the charismatic ability to reach the same level of excellence among society that he has within his in his mother's, his parents give him, or his, like, when he's a little kid, they all tell him he's a special little boy, and therefore he lives in a state where he has to sort of compensate for this. He has to change himself constantly in order to, and most times he'll be benign, most times it'll be driven by insecurities, but you can always tell when a spineless, weak little man is about to strike on you. A sudden arrogance appears. A manifestation of a kind of a domination that wasn't there, attempt to dominate that wasn't there before. A kind of a swagger that wasn't there before. Now, this is an indication that the frightened, weak little man behind the scenes has attained a kind of Dutch courage, not through alcohol, but through have found that collective trigger that has elevated them from terror and mediocrity to a position of dominance over someone whose position of dominance they had previously secretly loathed. Now, we saw this all the time with the lockdown and the whole thing with the Ronas and everything. You would see these kind of spineless, weak little men in newspaper comment sections, on social media. They were, they felt they had the power of the collective behind them, and so kind of a fuck you arrogance And you'll see this in your personal life with these people as well. Like you work in a job with a guy who's kind of like fits that potential, right? And he's just found out that he's got a position, say a promotion in the job where he's either equal to you or above you. He'll suddenly start throwing his weight around. Out of the blue, he'll get quite cocky and arrogant and full of his own shit, because he now feels himself in that collective sense of power given to him by the senior management or whatever. You see that a lot. And you say, where the fuck did this little boy lost persona go to? Where does arrogant asshole come from? Where does smug, hey, it is what it is, type suddenly come from nowhere? Now, they pay a big price, these types, right? They pay a big price because that mediocrity and that need to be special comes with an underlying perceived notion of existential dread. Now, it's not existential in a literal sense, it's the dread of the existential potential that what sends them into the collective as a tyrannical mass. So it's never the actual thing, it's the fear of it. They're afraid of things. Now, and they can certainly, while the actual fear is, when they're in the fear stage, what you have is huge numbers. You have them, they will play everyone off against one another. They will play everyone off against one another. They will play this guy against that guy, her against him, she against him, and will try to hedge their bets, especially in a situation where there's an element of conflict, to see how it pans out. And then at some point, they will feel a sense of existential dread. Now, the existential dread is nearly from the evil side. If you ever want to know who is the evil side in a conflict, the one who attempts to blackmail neutral voices into joining them. Blackmail is, when I talk about blackmail, I mean it can just be a hint that, oh, I got emails that you sent me, I'm going to send them to the boss. Oh, I'm going to publicize his comments, this stuff you said about your wife in a secret group. Oh, I'm going to send the pictures of things you said about your boss to your boss. You know what I mean? And they'll use the nickname, something like Turtle Man, you know, that kind of thing. And something related to him. Now, he will suddenly go into a sense of existential dread, okay? That he thinks it's over. And he'll say something like, oh, this has to stop, it's gone too far. Then he runs to the side that blackmailed him with, you know, exposing what a phony he is. You know, that he's against lockdown restrictions, that he didn't, you know, just anything really, you know, anything. And the fear of existential dread, he joins the evil side. He joins the evil side, who are suddenly his really good friends. So that's what represents his really good friends, is who successfully blackmailed him. That's the weak little weasel man. Then the weak little weasel man develops a sense of arrogance because the weak little weasel man feels he's now protective by the collective he's made the bargain with. It is what it is. And then a smugness and the most vicious and despicable form of betrayal then ensues. But in many ways it's pointless, because the ones that the evil side that has recruited him know what a fucking weasel he is, know what a fucking scumbag he is, and don't like him either. But the weak, frightened little man is now operating fully on impulse, okay? Then he becomes a kind of a policeman. He's the one who reports people who didn't social distance. He's the one who reports people who didn't wear the mask. The one who reports this person and that person. And it's all with a sense of arrogance. Prior to this, he was a little boy lost persona Frightened little man, maybe he was, trying to fit in, but now he's in a position of dominance. And he will be so fucking smug and arrogant, so fucking full of his own shit, okay? But he's still a weak, frightened little. It's all a form of psychological brought about by the masses. Now, the existential fear that the existential the fear of this thing is that they're afraid of not being on the winning team. They have to be on the winning team at all costs. At all costs. Because that's the only place the weak, frightened little man can attain a sense of any kind of dominance over the situation. Now, the lockdowns was absolutely the greatest thing that ever happened to these types. It was all their birthdays came at once. And also the type, it would appeal to these wife beater types. I often wondered, during the lockdowns, I remember I was saying, I wonder how many, there must be horrific domestic violence going on, because all the fellas who bash their wives around now have them indoors 24/7 all the time. And then, the more I thought about it, and recently I was thinking, no, they wouldn't have beat them up because the control grid was beating them up for them. Stay home and saves lives was beating up the wife and the girlfriend for them. So they just would have sat at home feeling very good because the dominance was external. It was coming from outside. Now, these people are now flipping over. You see, what happens to weak, frightened little man, because what he has devoted himself to knows he's a weasel as well. Like when the weasel, plays two sides of a smear campaign off against each other, and then joins the one he perceives is the winner. His really good friends who blackmailed him into it know he's a fucking weasel, and therefore his his security and integration within this is limited. It's not based on anything that can sustain itself. Likewise, the vanguards of the Rona, they're the same. They're now panicking. The bargain that they made with the totalitarian lockdowners at the beginning, they're now trying to make with us. The bargain is amnesty. Well, we all made mistakes. No, you were a wretched, weak little man. We were not. You made mistakes. You were wretched. It's not up to me to meet you halfway. It's up to me to banish you for all eternity. And that's what they're like. And I'm not just talking about the Rona and everything else. You all look back at this is really a video for the lads, because the lads will know about this more than the women. But the lads will tell you that they always knew someone. They all came who was kind of like a little sad sack, played the kind of little, harmless little nebbish kind of thing. Ordinary, particularly mediocre schmo. And then suddenly he had a position of power. But before he got into that position of power, or immediately at the beginning of it, this fuck you smug arrogance emerged out of nowhere. That's the telltale sign of the weak, frightened little man who thinks he's onto a winner. Now, they're now trying to bargain with us. Now, I saw a video the other day. I wanted to share it, but it's just too dark. And you can look up yourself. And it was about British agents who were working inside the French resistance. Or they were Germans, or just some of them were Eastern Europeans. Women. So they got them into England and they wanted to fight against National Socialism and help the French resistance. And they snuck in to France after had all their intelligence trainings, and they worked and there were 4 women, and they worked for the resistance as couriers, messengers, and so on. They all were terrible in the sense that they were very easily picked off by the Gestapo. The Gestapo and the SS were very easily able to see who and what they were and what they were up to. And in no time, all four were arrested, mostly in Paris. Now, they were taken to a camp. And now, wait and hear this one. This is almost like will remind you of 2020. The women were interrogated, but they were not brutally treated. They were put in isolation cells. They were put in isolation cells. And the doctor, the doctors went into their cell and told them that because of the typhoid in the, very dry today. Because of the typhoid in the camp, there had been outbreaks of typhoid. They were getting a typhoid vaccine, and it was all very up front, like they were not being treated badly or anything. The Gestapo doctor injected the four of them with a tranquilizer. But the tranquilizer was meant to kill them, but it wasn't strong enough. It was a weak tranquilizer. And then they were carried into the incinerator, and prisoners who witnessed the burning said that the women were burned alive. They regained consciousness as the incinerator door was slammed shut. So they got needlecraft, and then they went to the incinerator. The needlecraft was to send them asleep, and then they burned them. Now, didn't we see this all through 2020? People who were like 2 days from death were given the needlecraft. Oh, just in case. But they'll be dead in an hour. Give it to them. The old people placed on air balloon, or the people who were sick, asthmatics and so on, placed on air balloon and sent to the gods, the sky gods. Tranquilizers, needlecraft, and incinerators. And I was watching this documentary and going, none of that would have been possible without weak, frightened little men. And also the gullibility of people on the other side who had training but didn't have moxie, didn't have street smarts, stood out like sore thumbs. And I thought to myself, that's actually how we survive as a tribe, and to get ourselves, the parallel society with the second Renaissance, is to not get involved politically with any of these things. I'm hearing people all the time saying they're getting politically activated, they're going to join political parties, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Don't even ask me. I despise all politics. The answer is to walk away, because I'm seeing that same kind of naivety among well-meaning people, and it's only going to end up in a disaster for them, because they will be betrayed by weak little men on their own side, with a fear of existential dread that's not even real. It's existential. In fact, wasn't most of the whole 2020 experience basically existential for the ones who fell for it? The ones who actually died were died because of something else. And watching that gruesome film today really made me think, well, there it is. There it is in a microcosm, what they did to the world and how it happened. And a friend of mine in Australia contacted me last night and said, have you heard about these people who have been given the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft? And they have these dreams that are incredible. Well, I find this remarkable because this was actually the thing that made me realize early on in 2020 that this was a spiritual thing more than anything else, because I was having astounding dreams, and so are many other people, even people who got the Rona, well, mostly people who got the Rona, But I had them during the Rona. I had a very mild dose of the Rona in January. I was lucky, 2020, and then all the newspapers and websites and everything, mainstream stuff was full of stuff. Are you having strange dreams during lockdown? I'm like, why are these fuckers interested in our dreams? How did I know this? How did I know before it's even begun that people are having bizarre dreams, or they're? It's because they said they didn't do proper, or said they didn't do proper trials. I think they did, and I think what they discovered through those trials they would never release to the public. And one of them things was the strange dreaming. Now it's all coming out in doctors' reports of mostly children who are saying things like we collapsed after the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft, and then we had the most strangest, surrealist dreams, and we were sometimes awake while we were having them, and the dreams were being put in outer space. I nearly, when I read that, I nearly fell off the chair. Children who have been transubstantiated are having dreams of being on spaceships in outer space. Now, what was I saying about this thing in the early days? Is it some kind of alien force? I absolutely now believe it is. In fact, I've no doubt about it. When I say alien, I don't necessarily mean spacemen. I mean some kind of force descended upon this earth. And it infected the globalists first, but they're injecting people. And Dave Cullen's video the other day showed no doubt about it that there's actually self-assembling particles inside the needlecraft, nanobots, and then you see these weird Mother Hydra's babies and stuff being pulled out of dead people. What the fuck? But now the children not only having dreams of being taken off into space, commonly reported by children that have been transubstantiated, but also adults and children who've been given it, who never had night terrors and sleep paralysis in their lives, now having night terrors and sleep paralysis. The dream and the nightmare is now manifested into reality. It couldn't be any more Lovecraftian. It's like I now understand that everything in my life and all my work in every aspect, from artistic to book writing to video making to presentations, has all led up to me creating a compensatory mythology to help as a coping mechanism for the world that we're living in now. Because my God, it's the only thing that works. And this is that if I'm going to be remembered for anything from the last 2.5 years, I hope it's people will realize that I was trying to create, subconsciously and overtly, a compensatory mythology for us in the tribes to try and deal with it. I know that without a doubt now. It was always that thing that, going back many years, hearing Joseph Campbell say that modern man is at a loss because he hasn't created a comparative mythology to help him deal with the technological changes of the time. And because that line always stuck in my head, I think that's what happened with the Rona Chronicles, is that like something triggered in my subconscious that said, you've got to be the one to help people create a comparative mythology to deal with it. And what we're dealing with now is no different than all the weird shit that happened in the past, except now it's happening on a scale that's never happened in the past. And having a coping mechanism to deal with it is not rationalization, it's actually survival. Because if you were to take the evening news literally, as we know so many people do, you end up the frightened little weasel man who will actually create horrors beyond comprehension in order to try and survive. And we've seen that. And those of us who had these dreams at the beginning, and Jesus, when I think about how profound it is now, most of you watching this will have had those crazy dreams in early 2020. And I bet most of you are untainted by the transubstantiation. That was almost like we were getting a subconscious mythological insight into that this was not what they were saying it was, and it was a profound spiritual and evil event that we had to pay careful attention to. But now the people who have been needlecraft, now they're having the dream and the nightmares. And the only difference is we woke up from ours. I don't know if they'll ever wake up from theirs. Hopefully, we can help people and to have the, I don't care about the ones who are smug, arrogant assholes and wanted to lock us all up and refuses. I mean, we had three politicians in Ireland who wanted the ID pass extended to supermarkets. They wanted to actually starve us, and that's how dark, that's how evil and deranged and dark it got. There's no amnesty for these people. There's help for people. There's help and assistance and compassion for the ones who were coerced into it, but who otherwise didn't rub it in our faces, who didn't try and take away our human rights. But for the others, they made a deal with evil, and they have to now become evil. No doubt about it. There's no, there's no doubt about it. They have supped within the abyss, and there they will, there they will sleep in the abyss. It's nasty business, but it's the fact. And I'm convinced now that every experience that I ever had in my life, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way too, feel the same way. But I can tell you one thing: politics is not the solution to this. Those of you who are thinking of like going up to governments and demanding hearings and tribunals and all this stuff, that's not going to do it. That will not. That will actually just drag you deeper into their toxic sludge, deeper into it. And right now, we're going. I next year, after the great sleep, the darkest of all winters, the ones who have been transubstantiated, who have survived, and we're already seeing hints of this now, will become very dangerous physically and mentally and socially. But they won't turn on their masters who they love. They will turn on anyone who points to their masters and says, that's the reason. That's the reason you are the way you are. Because there's the most, next to have existential dread and terror, the second most fearful thing a frightened, weak little man can do or can be confronted with is the reality of his own existence and the truth of why he is the way he is and where he ended up. I have absolutely no doubt we will survive and get out of this, as long as we stay clear of politics, and as long as we continue to use the same toolkits that get us this far. The mythological rationalizations were very helpful, but also memes. There's a meme war. It's you have to have a soul to create a meme that's funny and powerful. The other side don't have souls. The normies, a lot of them don't have the soul to do that. It's been social media and mass entertainment out of them. It takes real to understand the power of a meme. Takes a real sense of soul to unleash the chaos magic potential of a meal of a meme. Takes a certain element of wizardry and sorcery and craft. And, the funnier the meme is, the more magical it is, because you're more detached from the fear. This is why the politics wants to drag you into the politics, because the politics is ultimately based upon fear. Fear. And that's it. I mean, the memes are doing it. I mean, I saw one, and it was called the Pfizer Advent Calendar, and it was bodies in a morgue, the doors being opened. And I said, yeah, that's it. That's how we've won. That's how we've survived. And that's how we've survived. But it's also, that's how we win. In tandem with the compensatory mythology, that what we were dealing with was not human, and who is on the other side, they're gone. You cannot give amnesty to someone like that any more than you can throw an anvil into a lake and expect it to start floating. Take care. Goodbye. Sanguine Gnosis.